Welcome to the AmericanaMusic.com podcast with your host, Sarah Popejoy.
Today on the AmericanaMusic.com podcast, we have the privilege of welcoming James McMurtry. Texas Monthly calls him a songwriter, and Rolling Stone says he's one of America's greatest living songwriters. James McMurtry's ability to tell a story, write great lines that hit in the right places, and create memorable characters is the best in the business. His new album, The Black Dog and the Wandering Boy, released on New West Records June 20th of this year. It is a pleasure to welcome James McMurtry on the show. Can you talk a little bit about where you're from?
I'm mostly from Northern Virginia. We moved up there from Houston in 1969. I do remember some of Houston, but most of my so-called growing up happened in Northern Virginia and in and out of D.C.
Who were some of your biggest influences growing up?
Musically, I would say Chris Christopherson. He was the first one that anybody identified to me as a songwriter. When I was a little kid, I wanted to be Johnny Cash when I grew up, but I didn't as to where songs came from. I was about 9 years old. The first Christopherson record came out. My stepdad got a hold of it and said, "You got to listen to this." I actually saw Chris live. I was 9 years old. My mom and stepdad lived down in Richmond, Virginia. I lived with my dad up in Loudoun County, but I'd go down there a good bit. And so we saw Chris and his band with Rita Coolidge opening. It was a couple years into Chris's career. I know he performed Jesus Was a Capricorn. That record wasn't out yet. I remember him playing that. They played a cover of Searching, and I didn't know Smokey Robinson. So that was the first time I ever heard the song, and those guys were having such a blast playing that song.
Yeah. Your last album, The Horses and Hounds, you describe as having a Los Angeles feel. Warren Zevon's ghost was lingering around the guitar tracks. How is the new album, The Black Dog and the Wandering Boy, different from The Horses and Hounds?
We recorded The Black Dog here in Austin, or West Austin. Horses and Hounds was recorded in L.A., so it's got that L.A. feel to it. Something about the place just seeps into what you're doing.
Yeah.
This last one we just did at home. We all live close to Austin, so we just drove over there and made a record.
Well, Austin's definitely not a bad place to record.
Well, if you need a player, you can just call one. You can call a section and say, "Hey, you got a B-Bender Telly, can you come over?" Easy.
Sailing Away, I would say, is an extremely vulnerable song, which I think people can relate with. I feel it's pretty in line with a lot of us are feeling today, but many of us have trouble expressing. Can you talk about that song?
Sailing Away?
Yeah.
Well, that's just kind of bits and pieces of life woven into fiction. I think anybody that travels for a living, you're going to have relationship problems to varying degrees, and that's kind of what that song is. You've got your home life, you've got your road life, and they don't always integrate all that well. Home life is difficult. You have to make decisions. You have to have grown-up skills. Road life, you really don't. Your only responsibility is to get from point A to point B with enough energy to do a good show. Repeat those steps 6 days a week, but it's not really that hard. You don't have to decide on anything. It's all laid out for you. Load-in time is, and that's when you get there.
Laredo, the first song on the album, previously recorded by John D. Graham.
Yeah, he wrote it.
Is a hard-driving electric guitar song. It's got the use of repetition that's so often associated with the genre of blues. Can you talk about that song? I love the feel of it.
That song John D. Graham plays, that's his song, and we used to share a night with him at the Continental Club. Our residency for a long time was midnight on Wednesdays following John D. Graham, who would often close with that song. John D's had some health problems recently, and he had a whole bunch of hospital bills, and while we were recording this last record, there's a club in Austin called The Hole in the Wall, and they decided to do a benefit hoot night for John D. And we used to play Laredo in our live set some, and so we had to relearn it so we could play this, this benefit. And we were set up in the studio. We already had drum sounds, so we thought we might as well just record the rehearsal. And we liked the results, so I had Pat McDonald emailed some of his Timbuk 3 harmonica sound onto it, and he sang that high harmony, and it made a pretty cool recording. Don Dixon, the producer, decided to put it on first. I trust his instincts with regard to sequencing.
Your song, South Texas Lawman, it's a great character song. I'm going to pull a couple of lines from the song. He hunts quail from horseback, and he cheats on both his wives. And used to, you could clock him good if they called you any names. These lines, they're just so visual. The characters are built and always have something kind of relatable. I've noticed in your choruses, I can't stand getting old. It doesn't fit me. It doesn't fit me. Chorus line.
That's kind of homage to my father. Sam the Lion, a character in the Last Picture Show, says that in the book. It's the scene where they're out fishing, and he just explodes and yells out, "Damn it, I don't want to be old. It don't fit me." So that particular line I just lifted from the book. It's not in the movie. The scene is in the movie with Ben Johnson complaining about being a decrepit old bag of bones is what's ridiculous. It's that same scene, but they didn't use that line from the book.
Oh, that's cool.
The song itself started with a poem that a friend of mine wrote. It was basically about his father's attitude towards South Texas. His father was from the Panhandle. He's a rancher, and he didn't like South Texas. He said, "Victoria County is not a county, it's a principality." The opening of that poem was something about the men cheating on their wives and hunting quail from horseback. Yeah, they do that in the Deep South. They get a bunch of dogs and some horses, and when the dogs go on point, they get off the horses and flush the quail.
Yeah.
I think in South Texas, they actually shoot from the saddle.
I love those lines. I also love the line, "His years are empty bottles tossed off in the ditch." You kind of straddle the line between poet and conversationalist. Can you talk a little bit about how those worlds meld together?
Well, I mean, the way I write a song, I get a couple of lines and a melody, and I chase it. And the first thing I have to do is figure out who said that when I hear the line. And so I try to envision the character that would have said it. And then if I keep following it, sometimes I can get a story. The words lead you to the story, if you're lucky. And the trick is you don't want to break character. You don't want to try to inject your attitudes or notions into the character because he might not agree with you. If he does agree with you, then you get your own point across. But it can get you in trouble because the songs are sung in your voice, and so everybody that hears it is going to think it's you talking. Sometimes I'll write from a female point of view. Nobody gets it because they don't spell it out. Rachel's song from an earlier record it's not song for Rachel. I'm singing from the alcoholic mother's point of view, but it's sung in my voice, which sounds alcoholic enough, but not all that female. If you're John Prine and you spell it out, you start your song with "I am an old woman," everybody gets it.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I about spit my drink out on the second line of Pinocchio in Vegas. The verses that can take you through an alternate story of Pinocchio as a man in Vegas. Really, I love that story. It's probably my favorite song on the album. In this song, I love the choruses in this song. It says, "Who were my grandmother's friends? They used to play bridge every Tuesday at 10. I think I love that because my grandmother used to play bridge once a week with a bunch of her friends.
She'd back out of the driveway and my granddad would look out the window and say, "Where's the War Department going to play bridge?" Archer City, Texas.
That's great. The song is great in and of itself, but the line just gets me, and you cleverly wait until the last line to say, "I can't call you up and ask you anymore." That hit like a ton of bricks. Can you talk about writing that song?
Well, that line about you can't call them up and ask them, 3 of my band members lost their fathers while they were touring with me. And the first one it happened to was Tim Holt, who was sound man at the time. Now he plays guitar full time in the band. I had to get him a ticket home from Grand Junction, Colorado. He flew home when his father passed and missed a couple of dates, and he rejoined us, I think, in Portland or somewhere. And he got off the plane, and he said, "Well, one of the worst things is, all their memories go with them. You can't call them up and ask them details that only they can tell you."
Mm-hmm. I recently asked my dad, so know what that's about. You really take the character and take it to another place. How has your writing grown since the album Too Long in the Wasteland?
I don't know that it has. A little bit easier because I don't have to work as hard at it. I don't force a song to make sense, because a song doesn't have to make sense. A song just has to breathe. It has to live. You have to have that Frankenstein, it's alive moment. And it seems like that some of the songs that I worked the hardest on didn't turn out to be very good. You don't want to get into that trap of trying to make everything perfect. You'll just end up rewriting and not getting anything. An example about a song not having to make sense would be John Prine's song, Jesus, the Missing Years. He's got that long rambling narrative about Jesus, but then he's got a chorus that seems to have nothing whatsoever to do with the rest of the song. Brings in that emotion and it's perfect. There's no real rules in songwriting. I guess that's what I've learned. Follow the feeling more than anything else.
The song Annie, I love the cello in the background.
There is cello in it, and Sarah Rose plays some banjo on it.
And sings harmonies. The conversational way you start out that song with, there hadn't been much happening in the news that day. Not much of nothing on TV. You know that the song is about the past because of the Enron reference. but you don't really know that it's about the World Trade Center until the final line of the first verse where you talk about 3,000 dead. First, can you talk about writing this song? And second, you're very intentional about not just writing great lines, but where to place them in songs, I noticed.
That may be just a skill you learn over time. I don't know. The song itself, I mean, it seemed like after 9/11, we were all under pressure to write our We Will Never Forget 9/11 song. I turned my term paper in 20 years late, but, what I remember... things I remember about them was that we heard from Yasser Arafat before we heard from our own president. They couldn't find him. He was, doing this PR thing, reading children's books to class, and the towers fall, and he's just frozen. He sits there and lets the advisors figure out what to do. And then there's that ABC News reporter, Annie, I can't remember her name exactly. She was on Air Force One when it was just flying around for a place to light, and happened to land off at Air Force Base in Nebraska, and calls us, and the guy back on the air says, "Annie, what you doing in Nebraska?"
Oh, that's who Annie is. Oh, that is so cool. I love that. That's awesome. For some reason, I didn't remember about Yasser Arafat giving blood, and I don't know why that was.
Just happened to see on TV between the shots of the towers getting hit was Arafat on a stretcher with a clear tube of blood coming out of his arm.
So after I listened to the song several times, I looked up about Yasser Arafat, and I was like, when I saw the article, my hair just stood up on my arms.
We weren't just going to blame the particular Arab nations that were involved. We're a racist people. We were going to blame everybody that spoke Arabic. Right on to Saddam Hussein.
I remember sitting there wondering why in the world we were doing that and why nobody in the news was talking about it. That was one thing that frustrated me. I understood that we were mad, and I understood that they felt like they needed to take action. But
the Saudis pull most of our strings. They got too much money. We weren't going to go after them. In Afghanistan, as Rumsfeld said, there's no good targets in Afghanistan. There's nothing cool to blow up. They wanted to go to Iraq. They wanted that oil. It was an easier target. Yeah. They forgot about a little thing called the Geneva Convention, a quaint little document that says you can't exploit the resources of an occupied country. My drummer was in L.A. We had a session. We were working on the St. Mary of the Woods record. My drummer couldn't get there from L.A. He couldn't fly. My bass player lived in New York. He was already in Austin for the session. His wife saw the second plane hit, but none of us could fly. 13 members of the bin Laden family were allowed to fly out of the country by a private jet to Paris without having to answer any questions first. What it hammered home to me was that aristocracy and money is always more beholden to their class than their countrymen. That next day, when nobody could fly but bin Ladens, you have Prince Bandar going on TV to tell us why, the bin Ladens are really good people. There's just one bad apple. Smoked a cigar on the balcony while the Pentagon was still burning across the river. So no, I'm not going to let him off the hook.
I think sometimes songs come out better when you've had more time to process them, for me anyways.
Well, yeah, and you can also wreck a song pushing it out too quick. I did that a lot, my early records, when it was all about radio play and getting the record out in time. I rushed some songs on a couple of those early records, so I had, songs that could have been really good that just aren't. I just stuffed some words in there and they don't really mean anything.
I remember seeing the documentary filmmaker, Ken Burns, him talking about that the documentary wasn't finished until it was finished, and that he takes years and years and years to finish these documentaries to get the complete and full story.
With records, they say you don't ever finish a record, you just stop. Or you run out of time and you put the thing out there.
I love that. The Sons of the Second Sons is one of the best written songs I've come across. Second son is based on the idea the oldest son was the inheritor of wealth, kingdoms, etc. The first verse in the song is about the second sons coming to settle in America. And then the second verse talks about the moon landing and the end of Jim Crow laws. By the third verse, you turn it on its head, showing the progression. I'm going to just read that third verse. Nowadays, we're feeling stressed. It's all for us and damn the rest. Telling each other to have a blessed day, all camoed up and standing tall, building bombs and border walls, as all collective conscience falls away. Can you talk about that song?
Well, of course, we saw the insurrection at Capitol. That didn't come out of nowhere. It was a long time coming. We've got generations of white people that have been told that they're better than everybody else, and they've been denied something. I don't see that. I guess the first couple of verses largely about a lot of our early industrialists were the second sons of European or aristocracy. They didn't get to inherit. They could come over here with a certain amount of capital, but they didn't get their estates back home. They didn't get their stations. So their best option was to come here and try to make fortune. So you have the combined forces of the second sons and the peasantry who was coming over here just to have anything, sometimes just to have something to eat.
I loved that lineage and way of putting it from then till now. It's kind of something that you know is there, but hard to put into words, but you put it into words.
That's what I do.
The black dog and the wandering boy, I'm not sure if they're memories, hallucinations, or...
My father's hallucinations. My father had dementia towards the end.
Oh.
After he passed, my stepmother says, "Did Larry ever talk to you about his hallucinations?" I said, "No." "He never talked to you about the black dog and the wandering boy?" I said, "No, but I'm going to use that." Song title to me, so I applied them to a fictional character. Drugged out kid still living with mom because he can't function.
Well, it's a great song. The last song, Broken Freedom Song, is a Chris Christopherson cover. What made you choose this song to record?
I recorded it kind of on a whim. I had to come in and do something. I had to do a fix on some of the other stuff that we recorded. And I had this 8-string baritone guitar that was messing around with different tunings on. And I told the engineer, "I just said, do me a guitar and vocal setup. Let's mess around with this while we got some time." And I think Christopherson had just passed shortly before that. As I said, one of my major influences as a songwriter, so it seemed natural to do that, and I'd always liked that song, and it worked in that tuning.
Worked real well with the album, too. In 2023, Knoxville, Nashville, and New Braunfels, you perform...
So in Columbia Falls, Montana, Bozeman, and Billings. Yeah, we did it all over Montana. All the states we went through that had these stupid drag laws. Figured, if it's sort of that poem, first they came for the drag queens, and I said nothing because I was not a drag queen. I thought, if I don't stand up for the drag queens, who's going to stand up for me? The major push in these drag laws was that they're targeting children somehow. Think about it. Drag performance is not a target-rich environment for a pedophile. You find them as, scoutmasters, little league coaches, clergy. They're all through the clergy, Leave the drag queens alone. They're over there doing their own thing, not hurting anybody.
I think it's pretty brave and cool what you did. Yeah.
No, we did that as an encore. First time in Knoxville, we didn't know. I mean, that law had actually been put on hold by the time we did that show. We didn't know it. We thought there was a vague possibility we might get arrested. And one of the attendees got real mad at us and went out on the street and actually found a policeman and tried to get him to come in the theater and arrest us. And the cop just shrugged his shoulders and walked off. Now it might be a different story,
What do you think makes a great song?
Well, great song basically has to be, or any song really should be more than the sum of its parts. That it's a live moment I'm talking about. That's when you can sing it back. Not only do you not cringe, but it gives you something, it gives you a lift. Now, a popular song, for a song to be popular, the listener has to hear his or herself in it. That's about identifying the character of the song. But a great song is not always popular. Popular song is not always great.
Well, that's true.
The sets do intersect.
Yes, 100% agree with that. The Black Dog and the Wandering Boy, released on New West Records June 20th this year. James, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. It's been an honor to have you on our show, and you're not just one of the greatest living songwriters, but one of the greatest songwriters, period.
Thank you.
I wanted to share with you something special, something I've been working on lately. It's called American Music Town. It's not set to even come out until September of this year, but follow the show so that you won't miss an episode. Here's a short clip.
Really, until I was in college, it didn't even occur to me that Muscle Shoals was anything that special. I mean, I grew up going between Muscle Shoals and Nashville all the time. And I grew up in Fame Studios. I would go there after school and, grew up around all of the people that made music in Muscle Shoals. But it truthfully did not even occur to me that those people were anything other than family friends until I got older and started to understand what they did and the gravity of the impact that they had. People like Rick Hall, for example. I mean, he was like my crazy grandfather, basically. I didn't know what he did. I had no idea that I was in the presence of somebody who was probably the most legendary person I've ever had in my life. That did not occur to me as a child. I mean, truthfully, I would love to say that I knew I was in the presence of greatness, but I truthfully didn't. In the way that both of my parents are, but my dad certainly is he is not one that would talk talk about any of that. When we did have people that I recognized and were famous around, I was instructed very carefully not to treat them that way, which has trickled over into my adulthood too. I'm very aware of not treating people like they're anything other than just people, good or bad. Maybe that's not necessarily always a good thing, but I really it was always presented to me that these are just normal people. My dad is a normal person. They just happen to do music as a career. I think because that town is so small, even at school and places like that, they knew my dad was a songwriter, but I think even the kids in my class didn't really understand the gravity of where they lived and what was going on in that town. That's probably the most interesting thing to me about Muscle Shoals is how unassuming it is. It's not like Nashville. I remember when I moved to Nashville when I was 16, I'll never forget my first day of high school there in Nashville. And I ran into, I probably should be vague about who this was, but I ran into somebody's kid that was in a band that my dad had written a #1 hit for. And I walked up to him and said, "Hey, my dad wrote a song for your dad's band. Like, that's so cool." Snubbed me and shrugged me off. And I thought, oh God, okay, this is a totally different thing up here now, and I remember feeling that like, oh, now everybody's parents are musicians. Yeah. And now it doesn't matter anymore. In Muscle Shoals, it was such stuff going on, but there's not that attitude that you have in Nashville where, everyone is someone. So it was a real shift for me. And even now when I go back home, it's kind of a shift because I've lived in Nashville 25 years. It's a very interesting place in that way that it has no idea its own value in some kind of ways, like the people that live there, a lot of them just do not even realize that music has been recorded there, unlike Nashville.
That's really interesting because you think about the dynamics of the Nashville sound versus the sound that's coming out of Muscle Shoals, which is not as, I'm trying to think of the word, like packaged or
it's not as slick. It's not as polished and slick, and it really does come through in the actual audio that is recorded there. Is much more unassuming, and it sounds the way that the town is. It really does. It's a very organic sort of
real
and understanding, its own power, and it is very real.
Here's a short clip from next week's interview with Elena Stacy.
Parents are both musicians and my brothers and everyone. But my dad, his job, he was a lawyer. And so he was very busy a lot growing up. And so for each of us, when we turned 10, he would take us on an individual trip. And so when I was 10, we went out west, Four Corners area. And, growing up in Chicago at the time, I think there was one country music station. And I didn't know any country music at all. And then we were out west. And I think it was either Brad Paisley or Rascal Flatts or, some of that early 2000s pop country, that commercial country. And I just was so taken in by the lyrics mostly. I think it was just, hearing songs that you could really hear the lyrics and really understand the stories they were telling. And, you could have a funny song or a nostalgic song or a sad song, just everything. It was like opened up this whole world of storytelling in music that I hadn't really been exposed to much yet. I just immediately fell in love driving. We had a blue PT Cruiser was our rental car out there. So I just remember it had a convertible. So we would just drive around in the blue convertible PT Cruiser. Got this whole world of country music opened up to me. It was really special and lucky to have parents who encouraged me branching out, learning new styles of music.
That's so cool. What a cool story. I just love that. And the imagery of you guys with the top down.
Saltwater taffies in the dash. It was...
Oh... That's great. That's great. You are also an actress and you had the full intent of staying in Chicago, I read, and acting. What was the turning point for you that you said, I want to move to Nashville and write songs?
I think it was a little bit of the always deep down inside me. I loved acting. It gave me a whole new outlet for performance. I love performing. But I think just growing up in such a musical environment as I did, there was kind of no question that was really where I was going to end up in music somewhere. I met my former bandmates in Nashville. In high school, I started going to Nashville every summer just to do some songwriting. And then I went to a camp there called Grammy Camp. And I met my two friends there. We ended up forming Maybe April, our country trio. I think just having a little bit of a pull to Nashville, whereas, I don't know, I think it just felt like the perfect timing that I had this connection with these two women and that we were going to move to Nashville and we were going to pursue this music career. And the two of them were a year older, so they were already there. It gave me a little bit of a home base. There wasn't really a question that it was going to be music. And I get to act a little on stage. So I get the best of both worlds.
Thank you so much for listening to AmericanaMusic.com podcast. Be sure to go to AmericanaMusic.com and find playlists of the Americana artists we've interviewed here. Also, be sure to follow us on your favorite podcast platform.